What is going on? It's Alex coming back at you with another video, and today I'm going to be breaking down the top wide receivers in the 2025 NFL Draft. That's right, we're going to be going through yet another positional group. Next is going to be corners. We've already done defensive interior for the top guys as well as all of the quarterbacks, so feel free to check those out already. Let's get right into this. Of course, if you are new, feel free to like, comment, subscribe. We're going to be doing draft content all year round. And, of course, got to give a shout out to my favorite sponsor in the world, UnderDog Fantasy. They just updated their terms, so you can get up to $250, and they give you a 50% match. Every single dollar you put in, they put in 50 cents absolutely free, so use that code HAILMARY. Links are down in the description. Use the link tree because it makes it just so much easier. Send your boy $60, so great company as well. We actually have a flag that we're going to be putting up in the back. I know, the back of my show is going to be a little bit different, but let's talk about how I'm going to be grading these wide receivers. First off, in the top left corner, you're going to see some colors. That's going to show you exactly what I think their role should be, and then also it gives you a rough range of where I think they'll end up in their career. So, as you guys are aware, this is the same scale I used when I first did. I actually tweaked it just a little bit, but it's the same scale that I ended up using with my wide receivers this past in 2024. So tier one, essentially it's the dudes who can be a wide receiver one. They're walking into the locker room. The receiving core has no legit number one receiver. They're a number one receiver. Spoiler alert, it's not going to be in this video. But tier two are the guys who should be starting almost every play. And, basically how I do that is based on my grading scale. 80 plus is going to be a wide receiver one. It's a blue chip player and above. And then 75 to 80, that's a guy who's going to be a genuine bona fide starter. And then we got the guys who are flex, which is going to be that 64 to 70 tier, which are basically the dudes who they can be wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 territory, guys who maybe we'll be seeing the field a little bit more depending on certain offenses, but don't have a guaranteed role on every single snap. And then tier 4, the developmental guys, they're that wide receiver 4, 5, and that's going to be about 64 down to about 55. And I technically have another tier, but let's not go into that. Let's go and enjoy this, though. How I grade the receivers on a category level is hard cut, change of direction. So this is going to be those in routes, those out routes, those curls, for example. It's basically 90, 180, 270 degree turns, right? So that's basically going to explain how well do you move when having to shift in a very quick manner in a very large directional change. 45 degree change of direction. Think about those slants, those post slants, the flag routes, that all matters there. Run after the catch ability, pretty self-explanatory. I don't necessarily go purely to statistics because I think a lot of defenders in college are absolutely ass at tackling. So, it really is more of an eye test thing as to, do you choose the right spot to run? Can you take on contact? Do you carry guys on your back? There's a lot to love right there. Separation is essentially a combination of speed and route running ability. Basically, do you generate separation? Do you use head fakes? It's a great way to be able to show a little bit more of the intricacy within the change of direction, the route running, as well as their athleticism when it applies to the game. Hands, it's actually just pretty much down to solely drop percentage. Of course, there is a little bit of a factor in terms of the quarterback play in there, but, for the most part, drop percentage is on the wide receiver. There are uncatchable balls that are not factored into that. Release, that basically shows you whether it's at the line or down the field, can you get past press? There's a lot to do with footwork there, a lot to do with handwork, but no need for us to get too deep into that. But that's a big category for the intricacy of the position. Speed, self-explanatory. A lot of it is play speed. This isn't just tested speed. If you see a 40 time, whoop-de-fucking-do. At the end of the day, if you're not actually going past players who are running 4.5, then I'm not going to give you a good grade. And we're going to see that very early on. Burst, that's acceleration. That's another factor that, goes for separation. Do you get out of your cuts and do you accelerate fast? Accelerating off the line, that's a big one. A lot of these guys will not have that. Versus press, this is something that I really wanted to factor in here because do guys get knocked off their routes versus press coverage? There's a lot of players in last year's class I didn't really love. In versus press, they got knocked off their routes, and I don't really have faith in them to be an every down starter when, a defender pretty much just nudging you changes the entire play. And then contested catching, I think that's very respectable. And then because of Rome Odunze, I ended up putting a blocking category in here. It's only 5% of the grade, so very, very small. But it factor does matter. If the wide receiver is just somebody who I truly love, I see a lot of things that, good mentality, something that maybe more than blocking, just somebody who's always working 100%, I'll be giving them grades that are boosted versus obviously the opposite. Don't take dream fits too seriously. they're there for fun more than anything. We're going to be going from 12 to 1, by the way. And this is going to piss people off right away. Ruffling the feathers. I see a lot of love for this guy because he makes unbelievable contested catches, and he has probably the highest contested catch grade out of all the receivers of the top of the class. Teteroa McMillan. This is a guy who I wanted to have as my number 7 player in the draft. He was that when I first ended up seeing him via osmosis while watching Jacob Cowing. And I love what he does in very limited roles. Now, when you actually watch his game, and in that same exact clip where, they're showing him do this weird basketball between the legs, like, I love that, by the way. He has unbelievable hands, and you can see that. The grades reflect that as well. I think it's a 2% drop rate, which is, again, amazing. But when you analyze even the second clip, because you're seeing it surface around Twitter right now, the second clip, he gets no separation whatsoever. We're talking about Keon Coleman getting no separation. People are complaining about that. Just wait. There's more. And I could have even knocked him down a little bit. There was a lot of routes where I thought he half-assed ran it, and it was genuinely upsetting to me because, again, this is a guy who I wanted to be on the caliber of Marvin Harrison Jr. Honestly, I know that technically we can want every player to be there, but I had him as a projected top 10 player coming into the year. And I've never been let down so much in my life, essentially. And it really kicked me in the nuts. He's not fast. He's really slow off the line, really slow out of his cuts. And, simply put, he rounds his out routes. He drifts on curls. He doesn't stop and then turn around. You can see Johnny Wilson, who is 6'6", 230, end up doing this a billion times better. So, before I get some hate, which I will, it's going to happen regardless. Simply just watch receivers of similar builds who are actually elite tier receivers. And if we're going to be talking about this guy as wide receiver 1 in the class, we should compare him against wide receiver 1s. Or, he should be better than a 6th round pick, right? And he wasn't. So, it's very unfortunate about that, but it got to me quite a bit. But I do love the contested catch game. He is going to be a really good jump ball threat. It's just, I think he's a developmental wide receiver. I don't think he's going to be able to etch out a starting role unless, something changes this year. Maybe he gets his head and ass wired together now that he can lead that Arizona offense. But it's not great. And honestly, I was really hoping that he'd be a better blocker, and he just wasn't. So, hurt me quite a bit, but obviously his hands are sticky as hell. B+ grade, by the way, is not what you see on every other report. A C is average and adequate for me in the NFL. So his speed is adequate. His release adequate. Change of direction adequate for 45-degree cuts. It's just not good. Contested catch at a B+ is ridiculous. And A+ is damn near legendary. You don't get to see guys with many 2% drop rates. So big kudos to Teteroa with that. But a lot to criticize. Barry and Brown's next. So he was a really fun one. He's basically a worse version of Isaiah Bond, who we'll be talking about later, but really good deep threat. Didn't have the legit popping your eyes speed. And, I think he was reported at 160. He's actually 174. And, 174, I think that's a pretty solid weight. I liked guys to be 175 plus, so I'm going to just knock him down a point. It wouldn't change the grade either way. It wouldn't. His position would be at 11 regardless. But anywho, I think that, he genuinely needs to be a little bit more well-rounded. I think his strength was primarily as a deep threat. I did like him. There was not much I didn't like about his game, but has a pretty high drop rate. I'm pretty sure it's in the 14% range, which is why he is down here. But good athlete. He is pretty smooth on those slant routes. Pretty much that's what his bread and butter is deep routes and slants, maybe some double moves in there as well. But as expected with someone who's about 170, 175 pounds at 6'1", he's not going to be your guy that you're going to when you have to say YOLO, unless he's open deep. But essentially, if he's locked up, you're not going to be throwing him the ball, especially since there are drop issues and he's not a great blocker. But, essentially the hands category is a kick in the nuts to a lot of receivers that I love. But, he's pretty adequate in every category, but the size does end up becoming a legitimate factor. Now let's talk about Evan Stewart here. Could have knocked him down a point, but you know what? He's an inch shorter and a pound heavier, and it wouldn't change the grade regardless. His spot would still be 10. So before people try to get on that, just keep that in mind. But, he's somebody that, to me, is a slant merchant. He has ridiculous separation ability on slants and pretty much slants alone. And there was a lot of his game that I thought did not translate very, very well. He's not even listed on most people's top 10, and here he is at 10 on mine. But he's somebody who gets knocked off his routes in press. Like, I saw him get absolutely eviscerated by safeties. Like, it's just something I did not want to see. And granted, these wide receivers, they were studied with an extremely high level of scrutiny. I was putting them up against the best DBs in the game, Georgia, Bama, Michigan. If they had a game versus that, that's a game that I'm watching. So that does factor whether they can handle press, is because we're talking about legit first round corners that are press heavy. So sure, maybe he'll be able to perform better versus non-press heavy corners, but you should be able to handle press if you're going to be a starting NFL receiver. And he just wasn't able to do that. Again, pretty high drop rate. If you're in that C- range, that's about like 9%, like 7 to 9% range. So, that's definitely going to be within his range. His comparison is not Isaiah Pacheco. By the way, I got to call that out. I always make one mistake on my graphics. That is not my, that was what I used to have for Brennan Rice. So RIP to the graphic right there. Definitely not my graphic, not the correct comparison right there. Do not have a comp for him, unfortunately. I wish I did, but I just simply do not. But Evan Stewart, I think he's going to work really well with Dylan Gabriel, who's someone who can definitely rocket down the field. I thought his play speed was very underwhelming. Didn't see very much separation at all, even from guys like Terry and Arnold, who were in the 4-5 category. Now, Terry and Arnold's very athletic for a 4-5 guy, but you still should be able to generate separation if you're in the 4-3s, right? So we'll keep that right there. Essentially, he is a slant merchant. That would be my comparison, is, a slant merchant. Now let's talk about Xavier Restrepo. Now this is basically I talk about the top guys plus maybe a couple dudes I like to sprinkle in there. This is one I was kind of dying to study. Xavier Restrepo's he pops off the tape all the time. He's always open, but that's because he's a really good route runner. And the issue is this guy is a snail off the line. And he doesn't technically get out of his cuts as well as, you'd want him to. He changes direction very well, but he doesn't get the separation. Those guys who can just generate that little micro separation with a good burst of speed. But, genuinely, Xavier Restrepo, one of the better route runners of this class. I don't really think he does much after the catch, which is okay. Not everybody needs to be perfect. But basically it was because of that lack of acceleration that I didn't think his separation matched his route running ability. Also, the fact that he didn't accelerate very well means that, even though he could reach a pretty good top speed, he didn't get there very often. So it's not like he was burning defenders down the field. Now, I don't really think he thrives in any of the areas where physicality matters, contested catch, blocking, or press, for example. But I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I just think Xavier Restrepo, one of the weird things, by the way, is I don't understand this. Certain wide receivers are really good with their footwork on route running, but not really good with their footwork off the line. Xavier Restrepo is one of those guys. Just with the release package, I don't understand. Usually that it's hand in hand. If you have really good footwork, you should be able to understand what you're doing for release. So that's an area that he can easily improve. I'm very excited to see him do so. I just don't know when that's going to be. So we'll see what happens there. But essentially, Xavier Restrepo, very underrated receiver. Big fan of his game. Now let's talk about AlexCBarbour. This dude's a beast. This dude's a baller. He's one of the few players I've ever given a 3+ for it factor. And he's super underdeveloped, right? You're not going to be getting for the route running ability. And, I honestly thought about giving AlexCBarbour a similar comparison maybe to Jalen Polk with a little more athleticism. But that's a comment for another day. It's a Pac-12 school that teaches their guys how to block and have athletic dudes, right? But very underrated route, or very not overrated. No one talks about him as a route runner, but I would just say very average to maybe a little sub-average at route runner. Not somebody that's going to really create with much more than his speed. But what I love the most about him is his playmaking IQ. This guy was always finding a way to get open. He wasn't getting open necessarily through route running necessarily or through physicality, but he always was trying to find a way to get open and make a play. And I love that. I really do. It's a category obviously I don't have in here, and that's really what I want that it factor position or that it factor score to be able to reflect, and just being able to see him always trying to run his hardest, always trying to get open, and being able to, stretch the play to the finest, the last second. That is what is awesome. And he blocks his ass off. I love that motor for him. So there's a ton to love about his game. I'm very excited to see how he develops, but there's also, I don't really see, you see that burst. He does not get off the line very fast, but he can pick up speed. There's a lot to his game that I think needs a ton of tweaking, but there's the foundation there that I absolutely adore in the third round, and I think that's exactly where he should go. Now, Trey Harris is next. This is a guy who I wanted to be a little bit better, but it's a very similar story to AlexCBarbour with maybe a little bit more fluidity and a little bit less playmaking IQ. Now, Trey Harris is fun to watch, right? He has had unbelievable games. Same thing with AlexCBarbour. But, simply put, he's just not going to be the greatest route runner in the world. He's not going to separate doing that. He's a separator with a deep speed. He's a good burner. He threatens safeties. He threatens corners with being able to toast them. And that's good. That's good. The best thing is he threatens them right away. And that's awesome. Seeing that burst, that acceleration off the line, huge for me. I think that he needs to really work on the other intricacies of the game, his footwork especially. And, I think the one thing that's really cool is even though he has a lower release grade, he still performs well versus press coverage because he uses all that 6'2", 205-pound frame. And also he does show that he has, the ability to get proper positioning versus press. So at the very minimum, he is at least really solid even when he can't separate. And that's a big plus for me because he has the athleticism. He just needs to work on the finer details. If you're good versus press, if you're good with somebody on your hip and you're also athletic, that means that you have the potential to be able to get separation. And even if you can't, you're still viable. I love the fact he's viable every single play. So loving that for him. I really wish that at 6'2", 205, he could block better than Tez Johnson, but we'll talk about him in a little bit. Here to ruffle some more feathers, Emeka Egbuka. This is somebody who I left the scouting report with the last word underwhelmed. Someone who I loved, right? This is a guy who I've been rooting for to be a top 10 pick. And the more I watched him, the less I loved. He's somebody who is essentially a really good slot receiver with the ball in his hands. But essentially, he's a good, not great route runner. I would say he's not very diverse of a route runner. We're talking about those posts, those nice slants. He does get that nice separation on those. But apart from that, he just doesn't have that micro separation ability, which sucks. But, I was really hoping to see a more well-rounded performance from Emeka Egbuka. This is somebody who I really want to be that first-round quality player, but I do worry that he might end up having to be just a pure slot receiver, that he just get the ball in his hands and let his feet do the work. But, he's reliable. Not a guy you send a YOLO ball to, but that's why you had Marvin Harrison there. Let's talk about Luther Burden coming in at number 5. This is going to, again, ruffle some feathers here, but, simply put, I said that again, take a shot every time I say that. But when you dig down, you look at what Luther Burden brings to the table, he's a really good talent. I think he's up there with Deontay Johnson in terms of being able to just operate so well with his body, low center of gravity, right? And my issue with him is the fact this guy has absolutely no motor. I see him jogging so many reps. You can follow me over on Twitter because I post all 22 tape over there that backs up what I'm talking about. I have no issues showing why I believe what I believe. There's a specific interception that Brady Cook threw, and it was an absolutely atrocious performance by Luther Burden. He ran the route well. He just ran it at 20% speed, and, Harold Perkins just read that shit like a book. And you just can't do that. You just can't. But, Luther Burden is super well-rounded, super reliable. There's not a category that he's actually not good in, or not at least acceptable. So, he is a good receiver, but I thoroughly despise receivers that take reps off, especially when they are one of the targets. I understand if you're like the 5th target and you're just basically there to act as a decoy, it is what it is. But when you are a legitimate option for your quarterback and you're running at 20% speed, that pisses me off. Might not piss you off, which is why you can be able to create your own rankings. But for me, That's why I graded him as such. So I think his talent is totally there. But for Terrace Marshall at LSU, which is why I said the motor, he would only pretty much run at full speed on basically go routes in the play where he was a primary target. That hasn't really worked out too well for him in the NFL. But let's continue on. Tez Johnson somehow was my number one graded receiver for a while, which shows that the class warmed up, right? Tez Johnson is a fantastic wide receiver. I don't know how a 160-pound dude can block like that. Same thing with Troy Franklin. Both those dudes can block very well. So props to Oregon for doing that. Maybe Evan Stewart can boost up his grade a little bit in that category. But, it's another guy. A lot of these players just run these slants just so beautifully. And, the acceleration Tez Johnson has lends a lot to that. That's where I really do see him thriving. He's probably going to be a pure slot option in the NFL, and that's okay. But he's somebody who is a plus athlete, maybe a double plus athlete that has blocking ability, which is awesome. And he has the intricacies down. Now, when it comes to curls specifically and, ins and out routes, I don't think he runs them as sharp as maybe I'd want him to. And that's something where I think he could sink his hips a little bit more. Maybe as he adds a little extra weight, maybe he could sacrifice that burst from an A to an A minus. That would be something where I would love to be able to see him just truly dig into the dirt and generate separation through just his pure route running. But we'll see what happens in time there. Hands-wise, I think that's closer to the 6 or 7% range in drops, which is okay. It's adequate. Contested catch ability, who the hell's throwing a contested catch ball to a 5'10", 160 dude? At the end of the day, you're the problem if you think that's a good idea. So let's get right into my number 3 player, and son of a biscuit, it's fixed. So my next guy at number 3 is Andrew Armstrong. You probably will never see this. No one likes to talk about Andrew Armstrong, but he's someone who's continued to pop off to me, like regardless of the year. I loved him a year ago. I loved him 2 years ago. Like, he's just someone who kept popping up every single time I watched Arkansas. I'm like, this guy is really, really good. So, he's back again. Love that for him. But, Andrew Armstrong is a fantastic wide receiver at 6'4", 200. That's a really solid build, and he brings all the juice in the world. He's a really good route runner, just smooth, crisp, and he's able to go up against the best of the best, and I love that for him. He's going up against Kool-Aid McKinstry and is able to handle him relatively well. After the catch, though, this guy's pretty damn phenomenal. He is dragging safeties. He's dragging linebackers. And, I didn't expect that for someone who's sub 200. But, this guy's an absolute baller. His drop rate is phenomenal. I'm pretty sure it's in that 3 to 4% range. It might be down in the 2s. But, really low drop rate. So he's reliable as hell. But, when it comes to, again, this is another weird situation where he can run routes well, but he can't do a release. I really don't get that. I did not see any form of release, and granted there's some off coverage in there, so he didn't really get to show it as much. But even down the field when Kool-Aid was on him, for example, I did not see him utilize any form of release package in order to get open. So that was one of the areas that kind of kicked me in the nuts. But someone who has great athleticism overall. B speed is really good. You got to remember that. C is average. C plus, it's pretty nice. B minus, that's good. B, that's pretty damn good. B plus, that's really damn good. And so it goes on and on. Because C is the average. So if you're at B, you're legitimately a tier above average. I think his speed is really solid. Burst is phenomenal. Pretty much it pops off right away. I do think, again, because of that lack of a release package, he does handle press a little bit worse than I expect. Contested catch-wise, he's up there in that 25, or down there, so to speak, in that 25% range. And then blocking, didn't really think too much of that. But Andrew Armstrong, one of my favorite players in this class. At number 2 is Isaiah Bond. I'm getting absolutely cooked on Twitter because my dumbass chose some really poor wording for showing how much I loved Isaiah Bond. I ended up saying that he was what people thought Jameson Williams was. Obviously, I didn't even think about the fact that is such a clickbaity thing to say. But for me, I was just watching it. I'm like, oh my God, this guy reminds me of what I thought Jameson Williams was without the production. So apologies to Bama fans about that. I mean, it's warranted to get cooked. So I'll come out here like myself and say that was, I could have chosen much better verbiage. So that's on me. But I just love how athletic he is. He pops off the screen right away. He takes the deep speed to another level. He's replacing Xavier Worthy's role as well, and I love that. He's reliable, very similar to Andrew Armstrong. We have two guys back-to-back that have the A and F, hands to contested catch ratio, which means, again, 25% range is that F for contested catch. So it's another guy who, a lot of receivers, it's going to be a lot easier to cut a 45 degree than essentially stop your body and have to do a 180 degree turn, 270, or I don't even know if it's 270. I think it's like 135. Who gives a shit? Or else do a 90 degree cut. So, it's going to be naturally more viable to see a better slant route, so to speak, than it is for an in and out. So that makes sense. But he's also running at such a fast speed. He generates separation through the fact that he really knows how to use the athleticism. He varies his speed as well, which is great. Keeps the defenders on their toes. They can't just track where he's going to be because you don't know if he's running at 90%, 95, 85, because the moment he needs to, he's going to run 100. And I love that about him. Of course, at 5'11", 180, you don't really expect him to be a good blocker unless they're freaking Tez Johnson from Oregon. So not going to be somebody that you want to have right there. But this is going to be a guy who's an elite deep threat. I think he's going to be a great guy. He can play the boundary. I really think he can play the boundary. 180 is a little bit on the light side, but the fact is he has the intricacies down of the game, and I think that's what really matters because he can take it deep as well. So I really love Isaiah Bond. Again, on me for being stupid with my wording. So I do apologize for making it look like it's a clickbaity tweet. So apologies for that. Pick number one, technically not pick number one, spot number one, Deion Burks. Another +3 it factor. This dude's a baller. This guy went toe to toe with Will Johnson, which we're going to get to that video very soon. Yeah, we'll talk about that. But Deion Burks is phenomenal. One of the best route runners that I've seen pound for pound. He really is special, and it's almost impossible. If you ever look back through all my grades, it's damn near impossible to have a higher hard cut change of direction than a 45. This dude does it. He knows how to drop his hips and turn on a dime. I love that about him. He has everything that I'm really looking for, except he has like a 15 or 16% drop rate. Why? And he can't do contested catch. Of course, he's 5'9", 190. It's just like, why, dude? This guy ended up he had a Cordell Patterson-esque rep where there was a fumble. I think it was maybe a screen pass to him. It wasn't a screen pass. It was a swing pass to him. Like a jet sweep. Who gives a shit? But, it ended up being fumbled, and he just picked it up and started reversing the field and looked like he could actually return. Do a really good job returning. So increased value there as well. But he just showed he can have a natural feel for how to process the field, which is great. But it really is the catching that, it's really bad. Like, really bad. You cannot have that type of drop rate. Now, I saw some really good catches in the game versus Michigan. So, I debated artificially boosting that, but I'm going to keep it as is until I see some progression. He's going to Oklahoma, so he's going to have a different quarterback. If the drop issues continue there, then it's very much warranted to have that be a major issue. But, for having an elite level of athleticism, I think he's going to be a 4-3 type of guy. I think he's going to have a great 10-yard split. I love the change of direction, so he's going to have a good 3-cone. He's going to be a combine monster. Just really working on the hands is what will change him from being a just normal starter. He's the only one who got a true wide receiver 2 grade, the only guy who I think should start every down. But if he ends up fixing that issue, and let's just say he gets to 6% drop this year, and maybe just boosts up his contested catch a little bit, he's right there with being able to be a number 1 receiver on a team. I thoroughly believe that to be the case. This guy's awesome. Keep your eyes out for him because he really can be a difference maker. So that's going to be the video. Thank you so much for watching. I love y'all. See you on the far side. Peace.